My name is Josh. I'm the teaching pastor here, and we're in the middle of a series that we're just calling Belong. And it's a series from 1 John, the book of 1 John in the Bible. And the reason we call it Belong is because one of the first verses in the book, John says that the reason he's writing this book is so that we, everybody who reads the book, may have fellowship with him as he has fellowship with God. And so the whole idea of the book is the whole purpose is that he wants us to be in community with him, to belong to the same family that he does, even as he belongs to the family of God, and so that we might all have a place where we can belong. I'm a nerd. I'm a huge nerd. When I type the letter T into the search bar, thesaurus comes up. You know, because I just typed thesaurus so much, they're like, oh, you must mean thesaurus. Yes, I do, actually. Good job, Google. I'm a huge nerd, and I was listening to this podcast by this guy who is a professor of psychology and theology, which is just like, that is a fascinating pair. And so he was talking about this interview he saw with an ex-white supremacist. And the guy was talking about their recruiting practices, and he said that they look for people who are shaky on one of these three areas. Your identity, like you don't really know who you are, your belonging, whether you have a place that you belong, and your purpose, like what you know or what you don't know about why you're here. And they look for those people because they know that their message can provide one of those three things. It gives you a new identity. They give you a new place to belong. They give you a purpose in your life. And he was just kind of dissecting the way that evil works. When we don't have a strong identity, when we don't have a place to belong, when we don't have a purpose, we're vulnerable to be caught up in something else, to be caught up in a system of sin. And he was just kind of talking about the way that evil works. And it made me so happy that we're doing this series called Belong, because it answers one of those questions. You belong here. You belong with a family. You belong with Jesus. And so we are in chapter 5 of 1 John. And last week, Steve is our lead pastor. He went through the last section. And in this last section, you have to know this so that this section that we're going through makes sense. In the last section, John talked about this word over and over and over and over again. He asked this question last week, what is the word you keep hearing? Do you remember the answer? Love. Thanks. Yeah, you guys were alive. That's great. And so it was love. If you look at like per capita, per 1,000 words, and you look at like all the books in the Bible, the word love occurs per capita in Matthew. It looks like this on a graph: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, Corinthians, and you get to 1 John, and it's like, bam. Like John is like, love. That's what I want you to know. I want you to know that you are loved and that you love other people. That's, by the way, why you can belong, because you are loved. And so that's the whole point. So he's talking about love, and he's going to continue his thought here at the beginning of chapter 5. Now I want to give you this disclaimer that the message today, it's going to be a little bit different. And Usually I feel like whenever I'm preparing a message, I have like a fire hose worth of content and like a pinprick of time to allow this stuff to come out. And I always feel like that, but I feel like that extra today. So hold on to your seats, I guess, and come with me. It's going to be fun, maybe. And I want to start differently. Usually we start with, I say, hey, here's the topic, and then we're going to kind of see this in the scriptures. But I just want to read the scriptures because there's really only one principle that I want to talk about today. It's a principle that I really believe can change your life. And I know people say that a lot, but I really believe this. And so let's just kind of pick it up in chapter 5, verse 1. Remember, he's been talking about love, and he says this: everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God, and everyone who loves the Father loves whoever has been born of him. So again, he's talking about love. John is saying that if you love God, if you say you love God, then what you need to know is that everybody who is born of God, you should love them too, because they're of him. They're from the same place. They're of the same substance. They're of the same thing that you love about God, that's them. And by the way, we are all the children of God. And so what John is saying is that we are to love one another because we love God. Goes on to chapter 2. He says, by this we know that we love God, the children of God, when we love God and obey his commandments. John does this crazy thing here. I haven't seen this anywhere else in Scripture, but John links following God's will for your life with loving other people. And what he's saying is that when we follow God's will for our lives, when we are pursuing him passionately, when we are obeying his commands, that act is loving other people. And here's why this works. This whole book, John's been saying that we are to abide. He keeps using this word, abide, love, abide, love, abide. He wants us to live in God as God lives in us. And so for John, if you are in God and God is in you, you are in the infinite being who is love. He just got done saying that in chapter 4. He says one of the most amazing things in Scripture, that God is love. And so if you are in him and you are following him and you are obeying his commandments, then you are connected to the infinite source of love. And so if you don't then pour out that love, it doesn't make sense. And John's saying that doesn't compute. In fact, a couple weeks ago, we went through this passage in chapter 3 where he said, if you see that somebody, one of your brothers, is in need and you don't help him, how can the love of God be in you? And you're just like, John, ouch, man. Maybe lighten up a little bit, but no, for him, it's like if you're connected to the source of love, you should be able to pour out love. And it's just simple for him. And so when we are following God and we obey his commands, we receive love from him, and we are able then to extend it to others. And this is verse 3. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. It's the holidays. I don't know if you knew that. And around the holidays, we spend time with family. And when we spend time with family, I think that this one, and his commandments are not burdensome. I think that's like, what are you talking about, John? Have you tried to love other people? Do you know what this is about? Like, this is hard. This is a hard thing at Thanksgiving. This is hard. I don't know how many articles I read about how to handle crazy family members at Thanksgiving. Like, that just seems to be the most popular thing that's going on out there, because we struggle to love even the people that we spend our lives with. Love seems to be difficult. But for John, he's saying that if you are connected to the source of love, if you are overflowing with love because he's got so much love in him and you are abiding in him, then that means you are overflowing with love. It's not hard because it's already bubbling out of you. Have you ever tried to turn a lamp on that's not plugged in? You know, like at 9 o'clock at night, and you're just, all you want to do is sit down and eat the brownies. All you want. And they have sprinkles on them, and you're just like, man, I just want to sit down, but I can't see where I'm going to sit. And so you're like, that's just me, maybe. You can't turn a light on when it's not plugged in. In the same way, it's easy to love when you're connected, when you're plugged into the God who is himself love. When the lamp is plugged in and you flip the switch, what happens? It turns on. Every time, unless the bulbs burn out. Okay, weak analogy. Anyway. He says, and his commandments are not burdensome. And this is the phrase that I want to meditate on with you for the rest of the time that we have together. He says this: for everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. Before I was a pastor, I was a physical therapist assistant, and I worked in a nursing home. And when you're in the medical field, you learn this thing that people want to get better, but getting better is hard work. And so a lot of times they don't want to do the work that is required to get better because they're feeling so bad. And I get that, like when you're just after a surgery, or if you're really violently ill, the last thing you want to do is, let's go do some exercise with Josh. It'll be super fun, A lot of the experience that you have as a physical therapist assistant is you walk into a room and people are like, get out, like immediately. And you're like, well, this is my life. And so one of the things you get really good at is finding out how to motivate people to do something that's good for them. And sometimes it's harder than others. I had this one patient who was the king of excuses. He was the king of excuses. And the reason he was so good at making excuses is because he actually had a really good excuse. He was there because he had a wound, and it was a really bad wound. And to make matters worse, the location of the wound was extra bad. I'll just leave that there. And so he had a hard time walking, standing up, moving at all. Any time that he moved, anytime he rolled, anytime he sat up, he was in a lot of pain. And, it was kind of funny. But so we'd have him walk, and, he's like, with a walker. But unfortunately, we got him into this rut where he'd like walk 40 feet, like just to the corner outside of his room, and he'd just immediately sit down. That's it. I'm done. I'm like, oh, all right. But that aside, he was actually a really fun guy. He used to be a salesman, and he had like the personality for a salesman. Like he was really outgoing and funny. He had the gift of gab, and talking to him was just fun. And like he'd tell you stories, and the way that guy told stories, man, it was like you could sit and listen to him forever. And that was actually one of his best ways to get out of therapy is he'd start talking and I'd start listening. And then 75 minutes later, I'm like, oh, whoops. And he knew that. He used that to his advantage. It was like, okay, you little jerk. But anyway. And he was like, his family was always there, like they, and what I loved about that, and I always love when families are there because it's like there's just a lot of love in the room, but this one in particular stands out to me because you could really tell that his kids and his wife came to visit him every single day, and they planned around the clock as much as possible that somebody was going to be there with him, and the reason they did that was because they really loved him, and it was because he was good at loving them. Like there was just, this family was just, there was a lot of love in this family. It was just really cool. And he seemed to kind of occupy the role of the wise one, the sage. He was the person that everybody came to talk to in the family. And so, I'd often interrupt, it seemed like little family counseling sessions. And the nurses would be like, yeah, I just had a rough day. And then I went and talked to him. And, oh, I just feel so much better now. Like he was just, that's who he was. He was a great guy. And then as the days turned into weeks, which then turned into months, his wound wasn't healing. And he grew more and more discouraged and withdrawn and depressed. And all of a sudden, his excuses weren't, let me tell you about this fishing trip I had once. It was, no, I just can't do it. I just can't do it today. It just hurts. I just can't do it. And I remember he was always cold. So, and it was so hot outside. It was the summer. It was so hot. And so I used to take him outside to kind of like trick him to be with me. And, maybe then I could get him to do some exercise. But I took him outside one day, and he was just like, I just can't do this, Josh. I can't do this anymore. And I was like, well, why? He's like, my wound is not healing. I'm not going to get better. I'm resigned that I'm gonna die here. And I was just like, dude, you're young, relatively, and in good health. Otherwise, like you can do this. And he's like, no, it's not. The wound is still there. I'm not getting better. And I said, well, if you don't do it for yourself, let's do it for your family. And he was just like, Josh, my family's sick of me. And I was like, what do you mean? They're here every day. He's like, they're sick of being here. They're sick of coming and visiting me. They're sick of coming and bringing me food. They're sick of all this stuff. They don't say it, but I see it. And this sounds weird, but really what it felt like was this outgoing, gregarious, sometimes obnoxious, but wise and kind man. It just felt like his personality had been stuffed deep down somewhere in him, and it just felt like everything was about the wound. It felt like his wound was the one speaking through him. It felt like it was controlling the way he saw the world. And I don't know if you've ever felt this before, but it didn't matter what I said to him or what he said to him. Like he believed that because of his wound, he was going to die there. And it didn't matter how much truth I preached. It didn't matter how much his family would say please and plead. It didn't matter what you said, or it didn't even matter what he said to himself, This was a hurdle that he just couldn't get over it. It was like a wall, a brick wall that he just couldn't get through. I don't know if you've ever been there. I don't know if you've ever been to the place where you know that your family loves you, but you just don't believe it. Or you know that you're not too broken to have a future, but somehow you just believe that there's so much brokenness inside you, and you just question, like, can this even work out? I don't know if you've ever been to the place where you've had maybe like a series of failures, and you've started to believe that you are a failure, and so you stop like trying in life. But it doesn't matter in that moment. If you've ever been here, it doesn't matter what you say to whatever is inside of you. It just seems like you're stuck. I don't know if it's the holidays, and I don't know if it's just the end of the year, but there's a lot of people in my life who are in this spot, who are stuck. And I know that I'm not the only one. And I read this verse this week. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. And I don't know if you've ever been here, but I was just like, bull crap. Like, you're saying that if I'm from God, then I overcome the world. But look at this list. God, have you seen the suffering that is in these people's lives? Have you seen this, whatever it is, this wound that they have in their life that they just can't overcome? I've given them scripture. I've given them sermons. They'll listen to worship music, but they just can't get over it. Like, how can you say that he who has been born of God overcomes the world when there's the presence, there's just so much going on? I don't know if you've ever been there. So I want to kind of dissect what this means. That everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. We talked a couple weeks ago about what the world means. John, this is another word he uses a lot. He kind of uses the same words over and over again. The world is one of them. And we talked about how for a long time Christian culture thought that anything not in the church was the world, and it all had cooties, and if you just stayed away from it, then you'd be saved. And so if you listen to Backstreet Boys, you're going to hell, you know. Or if you see an R-rated movie and you cursed once, you're going to burn, you know, like that's just kind of how it goes. But really, in reality, there are things in the world that God has created, like music, that are good, that reveal a piece of who he is. Comedy that reveals a piece of who he is. These are good things. What the world is a system of sin. What the world means is sin systematized. And here's what I mean by that. It's not like music. It's not like, it's not movies. It's not whatever. It's not secular culture. It's how that culture works together to cause harm. I think when we talk about sin, it is so easy to get hung up on that word, when really, like, every culture that has ever existed has a theology or a philosophy of what is right and what is wrong. Everybody thinks that there is good and there is bad. Everybody would say that you shouldn't murder somebody. In Christianity, we just call that sin. And so there's a truth here that I want to get to, but I don't want you to get hung up on the word sin, because the truth is that in fitness culture, being lazy is a cardinal sin. In crunchy mom culture, bottle feeding is a cardinal sin. You know, like in every culture, you have right and wrong, and in every subculture has a list of things that they consider to be sins. We just use the word sin. So don't get hung up on that. But here's the thing. Here's what the world means. It is sin systematized. It is my sin working with your sin, working with your neighbor's sin, all together. And what sin does is it causes harm. It causes harm to God, yourself, and to others. It causes a wounding. And one of the systems of sin that we've seen in our culture recently just come crashing down, really reached a reckoning, is the culture of sexual assault in the powerful regions of our culture. I don't know if you've seen the headlines, but to each person there is a pattern. There is not just them, there were people helping them. There were people set in place to cover up the sin. It's not just their sin, it was everybody who was involved. There were people who were paid money to cover it up. Like, I'm trying to put myself in that space where I would be willing to allow someone to continue a pattern of harming other people because that someone can pay me. Like, there's a system of sin going on there. It's all working together to cause harm. And I think that people, it is devastating, the news, to see like all the victims. But it is also, for me, it is really hopeful. Because what it says is that God is a just God, that he will not sit idly by and allow people to harm his beloved. And so we've seen this like system of sin just like come crashing down recently, and that's a great example of how sin works and how it's systematized so that it hides itself and covers itself up. That for John, that's the world. Now there's two ways that you can think about this. You can think about the world outside of ourselves, and you can think about the world inside of ourselves. The world outside of ourselves, a good example is what we just talked about. Here's the system that we can see, how it all operates. Here's the money. Here's the conversations. Here's the lawyers saying this. And you can see this whole system, how it works. But the world inside ourselves is what was going on in his heart when he decided to do that. What was going on in the victim's heart? What's going on in their heart right now? What's going on in the person who received the payoff? What was going on in their heart? That is the world working internally. Another good example of this is pornography. For a long time, we've known that the people who work in the porn industry have been over 95% have a pattern of being molested and abused. We've known that it is bad for the industry itself, is bad for the people who work in it. But for a long time, the excuse was like, well, what harm does it do? They've chosen to be in this. What harm does it do for me? And the last 5 years or so, what we've seen, studies come out about how porn users struggle to empathize with women. And I'm just making a guess here, but if you struggle to feel for somebody, like if you struggle to see them as anything other than an object, I'm just guessing that your relationships are going to have a hard time. You're going to have a hard time staying together with, love for you is going to be incredibly difficult. And so this is a great example of how sin affects not just the people in the industry, but also affects you. And here's the truth about all of us. We have all been harmed by the world in some way. Whether it's someone else's sin or whether it's our own. And this is kind of how the world works internally. Can we throw the graphic up there? Remember, we said that sin harms you. It wounds you. And this is kind of how it works. The wound speaks a lie to you. If out of that lie, that makes us feel in a way. And out of those feelings, we develop these habits to help us cope with those feelings. And out of those habits, it controls sort of our life situations. So for my patient, he has a literal wound, but his family struggling to be with him, and just his own thoughts were hurting him internally, and it made him believe that his future was not possible anymore. It made him believe, and here's the lie, that he was never going to get better. And as he believed that lie, he then became depressed and so discouraged. And out of that discouragement and depression, he chose not to participate in therapy anymore. And because he didn't participate in therapy, he's in this situation in which he lays in bed all day, and the nurses think, what's wrong with him? And his family thinks, I don't, what's wrong? I don't understand. Well, this is what's wrong. I listened to, one of my favorite pastors of all time was listening to a story he told about a pastoral counseling appointment he had, in which he saw this girl who was in his church who had been molested so many times in her family, and every time she was told that she was dirty, and that's why it was happening to her. And so he would ask her, why do you think that you struggle with alcohol? Because I'm dirty. Why do you think you push friends away? Because I'm dirty. why do you think you can't hold a job right now? Because I'm dirty. I want you to see how the wound lied to her, how she believed that lie, and how out of that lie stemmed these feelings of her own inadequacy. It stemmed a fear of getting close to other people because she's too dirty. What if she gets them dirty? And out of those feelings, she developed a habit of pushing people away, of never connecting, of self-medicating those feelings with alcohol, which led to a life situation in which her friends and family are like, what's wrong with you? That's what's wrong with her. She's been wounded. Now, this is something that is common to all humans. We live in the world. And what that means is the world has impacted us in some way, whether it was our sin or someone else's sin. We've all been wounded. We've all been wounded. I want to talk about the lie for a second here. Have you ever noticed, like in the situation with my patient, it didn't matter what I said to him. It didn't matter what truth was there. He could even say truth to himself, but he just couldn't move on. He just couldn't get over it. And the reason for that is because the wound empowers the lie. The wound empowers the lie. It stands as evidence that the lie is true. See, you have a wound, you haven't gotten better, you're never going to get better. See, you've failed over and over again in all of your endeavors, you're always going to be a failure. See, you were told you were dirty, now you are dirty. The wound speaks the lie, and it has power with it. Did you know that a lie is more than its content? I think sometimes we think that a lie is just the words that are spoken. It's just sort of the message that we receive, but it's not. There is power underneath that lie. There is conviction that that lie is true. There is what could be said as heat. Like you believe that there's a zeal there. There's something that you just can't get over. There's like a rock that has just been poured out onto your soul, and it's just pushing you down. You can't even get out from under it. And the reason is because the wound stands as incredibly strong evidence to the lie. This is why we can't just attack a lie with new content. In pastoral counseling, what they'll tell you is that you preach the gospel to people who are down. And so you somebody comes in and they say, I have a series of relationship failures. I think I'm a failure. And then what you do is you say, well, in Jesus you have victory. So fixed. See you next week. Now we all know that that's not true. We all chuckled because we know this. We know this somewhere deep inside of us, that you can't attack a lie simply by adding new content. Because a lie is more than its words. A lie it's more than the thing that you believe. There is a power and a force underneath it. And what that power and force is the wound itself. The wound stands as evidence. And so, this whole week, I've been reading this verse like over and over and over again. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. Overcomes the world. God, if everyone who has been born of you overcomes the world, then why are there so many people who are sitting underneath the weight of their grief? Then why are there so many people who can't get out from under their suffering? If they overcome the world, that doesn't look like overcoming to me. And I realized that there was another sentence. John says this, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. In the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s and 1600s, there was a group of theologians who kind of got together, and they were, all of a sudden they've divorced from the Catholic Church, and so the way of doing church and the way of thinking about theology and the way of thinking about the Bible, all of a sudden they didn't have that way anymore. Like they had to build it on their own. And so they got together and they had to figure out what is faith, like what even is it? And they decided that faith is at least these three things. It is notitia, that's a Latin word. We get the same word note. It means the content of your faith. It means that Jesus came, died, and rose again. That's the content. That's what we believe. That God loved you so much that he died for you. That's the content. That God exists in Trinity, that Jesus put on flesh, the incarnation. Those are the content of our faith. But as we've seen, faith doesn't overcome the world by giving new content. It is more than just the content. So they said there's also this. It is assensus. Assensus is a Latin word from which we get the English word assent, not like ascend and descend, like mental assent, like I assent to that, I believe that. And what they really talk about here is its conviction. It's heat. It's the power behind the content. It's the thing inside of you that screams, yes, this is true. And they said that when you have that conviction, and evidence of that conviction is you then also have fiducia, which is the Latin word for faith. And it just means faithfulness, not like what you believe, but faithfulness to that belief. So you have the content, you have a conviction that that content is true, and out of that conviction, you change your life and you structure it in such a way that it mirrors that content. And by the way, when you do that, it provides a feedback loop. When you structure your life in faith, it provides a feedback loop to the truth of the content. And here's how this works. When you go out and you fail, when you sin, when you mess up, when you make a mistake, we know that the truth is that none of that counts, that Jesus took that for you, and that in him you are considered 100% pure and righteous. And so every time we fail, we have an opportunity to rediscover the truth of the content, to feel that conviction all over again, and to change and order our lives to mirror that. When you have this kind of faith, it provides that feedback loop. Does that make sense? One other thing that they stressed is that faith is a gift. We see this in Ephesians 2, that faith is something that's given to you, and this is so crucial. Because remember the power of the lie. That the wound speaks the lie to you. And so often it is so hard to overcome that because the power of the wound is greater than your own. It's like you can scream new content at that wound, but nothing changes. But what we believe in faith is that God gives us a conviction. He gives us something new. He gives us a connection to a force greater and more powerful than the conviction of the lie. And so faith, for John, is the victory that overcomes the world. I want to show you this. Faith gives us a greater content. When the lie says, you are failed, so you're a failure, you were told you're dirty, so you're dirty. When the lie says they haven't loved you, so they don't love you, it gives us a better content based on a greater wound. No longer is your wound the one who is speaking to you. No longer is your wound the one that is defining your life. Your life is defined by the wound of another. A greater wound, a wound in which all of the sin in the world was put on God himself. And now that wound is the wound that speaks to you. It gives you greater content, that no matter what your wounds are, there is a wound that was greater, and it was taken on your behalf. Faith gives us a greater conviction by connecting us to a greater power. It gives us something stronger because when the lie and when the wound speaks the lie in that powerful way and you're stuck and you just feel like you're underneath it and you can't even get over it, we have something called the Holy Spirit who dwells within us, who connects us to a source of power that is greater than the power of the wound. Faith is the victory that overcomes the world. Faith gives us a better faithfulness because then every time we fail, we know that we have a new opportunity to believe that God loves us despite of our failures. We have a new feedback loop. It gives us and reinforces a greater message. Faith is the victory that has overcome the world. Do you believe that this morning? I had another patient once who was the coolest dude. When I met him, he and his wife shared a room in the nursing home, and they had been married for over 70 years. They got married in their late teens. They were in their 90s. And it was the first time that they hadn't shared a bed in those 70-some years. They had their separate beds in the facility. Just kind of amazing. When you're together with somebody for 70 years, like, what does that produce? That is beautiful. And he would tell me stories about how in his first job, he made 37 cents an hour at Ford. And on that wage, he had an apartment that his wife and kids stayed in while he built his own house. That's just the dude he was. And how he was a pastor. And he was good. And his denomination promoted him up through the ranks until eventually he was like over the operations for the entire state. And he would tell me stories about how his son left the faith. And back then, everybody was in the faith. It was a Christian nation. It was like it was everything. And for somebody to leave the faith was a huge deal. And he said that he would just call him and leave him a message every day. Hey, I love you. Hey, I love you. Hey, I love you. Hey, I love you. And I met his son, and his son came back to the faith, and he would say that it was because of how well his dad loved him. And I just, like, this guy, I want to get to 96 and still be married to my wife. I want to get to 96 and have my kids love Jesus because I was a good model of what Jesus' love was. This is the dude I want to be. And he was married to this lady who was nuts. I mean, she was great. She had kind of lost her mind by the time I met her. And she would do this thing, okay? So she would tell stories and she would shake, right? So and it's the same story. And she would say, I have 3 beautiful children, and she's like shaking. And then the story always inevitably had, and one got away, but the Lord found him. You're like, oh, wow, cliffhanger. Whew, I'm glad that ended well. And then she would always say, at the end, it would always finish, and their grandmother gave him a corner of the farm. And then she would say, she'd like kind of steer off into the distance, and she would just like get kind of quiet. And then she'd say, have I ever told you I have 3 beautiful children? And you're like, here we go again. Let me guess, one got away. Ha! We can be a little snarky, I'm sorry. She was so cool. She wrote books of poetry, and she loved everybody. She had no idea who anybody was, And everybody, your hand, and she would just look at you like she loved you so much. And over time, she got sick, as you do in your late 90s, and she got pneumonia, I remember, and she would lay in bed all day. And I remember having to do therapy with her, and she would look at me, and I'd been with her enough that she began to recognize me, so she would say, I'll get up for you, I guess. I'm like, you are so sweet. But other than that, she would lay in bed, and I remember her husband, he had been bedridden for a long time, and so his posture was terrible. It was like the bottom of his rib cage sat on his thighs. He just was like this the whole time. And he had his arms were in, and the tightness of his muscles, like his rounded shoulders, and so he just sat in his chair like this, and he couldn't, because of his posture, he couldn't look up at you. He'd like turn to the side and look to the side to see you. And I remember seeing him all crumpled up in this chair with his hand on her hand, for hours. Because after 70-some years, when your wife is bedridden, that's what you do. And I remember the day that I walked in, and they said that she had died. And the first thing I did was go to his room, and I remember putting my hand on the door frame and just crying. And I went in and I sat on the bed, and he's sitting in his chair like this. And I grabbed his hand, and I'm bawling. Because what do you do after 70 years? And he looked up at me, and he started crying too. And then something happened. He all of a sudden changed. I think he just saw me crying and just was moved that I was crying for him. And I was holding his hand, and he shifted his hand so that he was holding my hand, and he grabbed it so strong. And I remember he took this deep breath, and the air just like filled, and he sat up so straight, and he raised his other hand like to the sky, and he's squeezing my hand, and he just starts to pronounce this Old Testament, old school type blessing over me, over my family, over my future ministry, that my relationships would be good with my kids and with my wife, that I would be a pastor that had the heart of God. I just, like these words that I still remember, and I have to tell you that it was a holy moment. Because it wasn't him speaking anymore. It was like the Spirit was just like, it was thick, and he was saying what the Spirit was, and I was hearing this, and I have to tell you that I still look back at that time, and I cry every time I tell this story, because for me, when I'm discouraged, when the wounds in my life try to speak the lies that will derail me, the moment of the experience of hearing from God through his people was so powerful and so moving that the wound has nothing it can say to it. Faith is the victory that overcomes the world. I believe that it is a part of the human experience to be wounded, and for our wounds to speak lies that can derail the rest of our lives. And so I don't know if you're here today and you have a wound. Maybe you feel like you're stuck under something. And maybe you feel like you don't want to carry this into next year. Like we're coming up on the holidays, and maybe you don't want to carry this into the holidays. Like you just want to get out from under this in some way, but you try to speak content to it, and you try to speak truth to it, but it won't go anywhere. I believe that you need conviction from the Spirit. And so we're going to close a little differently. What I want to do is give you some time to reflect. And I wonder if you would all just kind of like bow your heads with me and ask God if there is a wound, a lie that he wants to reveal to you from your life. Just take about 30 seconds and just ask him that and just sit in his presence. Identified something, I wonder if you would answer this question. What has this wound, what has this lie, what has it cost you in your life? What peace has it removed? What joy has it prevented? What love has it blocked? What does it cost? I want to take another 30 seconds and just tell God, the Spirit who dwells within you, would you just tell him what it has cost you? do is to allow space for the Spirit to give you a stronger conviction, something that overcomes and breaks the power of this wound. And to kind of symbolize that, we have over here to my left a sort of altar that is built up. There's a lot of symbolism in coming down to the altar, coming to the foot of the cross, seeing the wound that is greater and leaving your wound there. There's a basket that has some rocks in it. The rocks symbolize like the power of the lie. And so I wonder if you want to, you could line up over here and grab a rock. When it's your turn, you can put it on the altar. And we have a hammer there. And the hammer represents that conviction, the power of the Spirit. And I'm serious, man, like crush that thing. And when you feel the impact, just know that is like the power of the Spirit. That is that conviction. That is that power that can break the other power. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. If you want to do that, you can go ahead and start lining up over there, and then I'll come up and close our service.